Imagine you have, like, a mass spectrometer sitting in a lab.
Okay, yeah.
And you've got a detailed geological record and, the absolute latest carbon dating technology right in front of you. Just a perfectly sterile laboratory environment.
Right, very clinical.
Exactly. And you sit there and you think you have human history entirely figured out. I mean, you dig up a piece of, say, Neolithic pottery.
You run it through your machines.
Yes. You run it through the machines, and you point to this very neat, highly quantifiable chart on the wall. And it feels safe.
It feels incredibly safe. It's objective.
It's binary, right? Because we all desperately want our past to be categorized into these distinct, comfortable little boxes.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, it creates this wonderful illusion of total control over the narrative of where we came from. But the thing is, the moment you step out of that laboratory...
That's always the catch.
Right. The moment you step out and wade into the origins of human theology or mythology and, those really ancient foundational narratives, that mass spectrometer suddenly becomes utterly useless.
It does. It really does.
You leave the neat timeline behind, and you enter a landscape that is just... Well, it's the absolute definition of narrative muddy waters.
Which is exactly why we are pulling you, the listener, into those muddy waters today. So welcome to this deep dive.
Yes, welcome.
Today, we are taking you on this massive, intricate journey through some of the most foundational, heavily debated, and really culturally pervasive narratives in all of human history.
We're talking about the dawn of humanity here.
Exactly. The psychology of the first families, the birth of early civilizations, and, the catastrophic scattering of languages. And to do this, we are unpacking a very specific, fascinating piece of source material.
Yeah, so we are looking at excerpts from a theological text. It's called The Law of God by Father Seraphim Slobodskoy.
And specifically, we're looking at part 3, chapters 8 through 14.
Right, and this is a text that really blends classical biblical narrative with a practice known as historical apologetics.
Right, and if you aren't familiar with that term, think of historical apologetics as basically setting up a courtroom defense for a faith tradition. But instead of just quoting scripture to prove the scripture...
Which is circular reasoning.
Exactly. Instead of doing that, the author calls 19th century geology, linguistics, and ancient anthropology up to the witness stand.
It's a very specific kind of intellectual defense.
It really is. But before we go any further, we need to be incredibly clear about the mission of this deep dive today.
Always good to set the ground rules.
Right. So our goal today is not to endorse the religious or historical claims made in this text. We aren't here to preach them to you.
Definitely not.
But on the flip side, we also aren't here to aggressively debunk them from some skeptical modern perspective.
Right. We are stepping into the role of basically literary and philosophical architects.
I love that framing.
Our focus is entirely on unpacking the fascinating internal logic of the text itself. We want to examine how this author constructs a completely cohesive, airtight worldview out of stories that are literally thousands of years old.
Yeah, we're looking at the mechanism behind the narrative. How does the author make these seemingly disparate events fit together to form a continuous chain?
Exactly.
So the mission is to map out this grand thread the author weaves, showing how human intention, environmental corruption, language, and memory all interlock.
It's basically the story of a lineage desperately trying to preserve what they call the true faith amidst a rapidly changing and often very hostile world.
Right, so we have to start at the first fracture. The very first family after Eden. This is chapter 8, the story of Cain and Abel.
Right, so these are Adam and Eve's first children, and the text immediately establishes this harsh dichotomy between them.
Right from the jump.
Right from the jump, through their professions and their actions.
Yeah.
So Cain is introduced as a worker of the soil. He's a farmer. And Abel is a shepherd. So they both approach God to bring offerings. Cain brings the fruits of the earth, and Abel brings the absolute best beast of his flock.
Now, from a purely material, ancient economic standpoint, you might look at that and see a perfectly balanced society.
You would. You have agriculture and you have livestock.
Meat and vegetables.
Exactly. But the text draws a massive, fatal distinction between these two offerings. And the author makes it crystal clear that God's rejection of Cain's offering has absolutely nothing to do with what they actually brought.
Right. It's not a dietary preference.
No, not at all. It is entirely about the internal disposition of the men bringing the gifts.
And the heavy, almost exclusive prioritization of internal disposition here, It's the foundation for the author's entire moral framework for the rest of the text.
It really is. The text explicitly states that Abel possessed a kind and meek nature. He brought his offering from a pure heart with love and faith.
And God accepts this sacrifice.
Yes, and the author includes this striking visual detail. He says the smoke from Abel's altar rises straight up into heaven.
Oh, right. While Cain's smoke basically just rolls along the ground like this dense, heavy fog.
Yeah, it's a very vivid metaphor.
Yeah.
Because the text explains that Cain was cruel, he was evil, and this is the phrase that really caught my eye, that he offered his sacrifice only out of habit.
Only out of habit.
Yeah, he did it without love, without reverence. He was quite literally just going through the motions.
That phrase, only out of habit, it really reveals a profound psychological argument that the author is making.
How so?
Well, I mean, it's saying that mechanical action, even if it perfectly mimics a righteous or holy act on the surface, is inherently corrupt if the internal intention is hollow.
Oh, absolutely. The material value of the fruit versus the sheep is completely irrelevant.
Right. The author is basically positing that a spiritual void cannot be masked by outward compliance. I was actually trying to map this onto a modern experience for anyone listening.
Oh, I'd love to hear this.
Okay, so imagine it's your birthday, right? Okay. And one friend hands you a generic $20 big box store gift card that they clearly grabbed in the checkout aisle like 5 minutes before walking into your house.
We've all been there.
Right. And they did it purely out of social obligation, pure habit. But then another friend hands you this handcrafted present that references a deeply personal inside joke, something that clearly took them 10 hours to make.
Okay, yeah, the contrast is stark.
Because technically, both individuals have fulfilled the social contract of bringing a gift to a party.
Right, they both performed the mechanical action.
But the internal reality of those two gifts is miles apart. Like you feel the difference instantly when you receive it.
You do.
And taking this back to the text, if Cain's sacrifice was rejected simply because it became a mindless habit, I mean, the author is implying something quite radical about religion itself.
Yeah, he is.
The text seems to argue that religious ritual, when it's done without active, burning emotion or genuine intent, is not just worthless, it is actively dangerous.
And it's dangerous because it breeds resentment. Like, Cain doesn't reflect on his hollow intention, right? He doesn't say, oh, I should be better.
Yeah, he gets mad.
He becomes violently jealous of Abel's pure intention. And this spiritual void leads directly to the first murder.
He calls his brother out into a field and kills him.
Yeah. And this is the moment the text introduces this chilling, incredibly iconic psychological exchange between the divine and the human. God asks Cain, "Where is Abel, thy brother?"
And Cain just brazenly snaps back. He says, I know not, am my brother's keeper.
Which is just wild to say to God. But we need to pause on the nature of God's question here.
Okay.
Because the internal logic of the text depicts God as completely omniscient. He already knows exactly where Abel's body is.
Right. He's not asking for GPS coordinates.
Exactly. Therefore, this question is not a request for data. It is a therapeutic prompt.
Oh, a therapeutic prompt.
Yeah, God is offering Cain an opportunity for confession and repentance.
But Cain entirely rejects the prompt. He rejects the fundamental responsibility of human brotherhood right there.
And in response, God curses him to be a fugitive and a vagabond.
But then, right after that, the text does something really fascinating structurally. Like it just hits pause on the narrative to lay down some very specific, definitive moral theology based on this first death.
It does. It uses Cain to establish the absolute sanctity of human life as a divine gift.
Right. The author explicitly defines murder as taking a neighbor's life without the right to do so, establishing that life belongs solely to the Creator.
But the text pushes even further into the psychology of life and death here, and it addresses the taking of one's own life.
Yeah, suicide.
Right. It categorizes suicide as the, quote, most terrible sin, end quote, noting it is only pardoned in cases of severe mental illness or insanity.
Which is a very heavy, definitive theological ruling dropped right into the middle of this ancient story.
Yeah.
I mean, why does the author rank it as the most terrible in the specific framework?
Well, according to the text's logic, it's because it represents the ultimate usurpation of God's authority. If life is a divine lease, destroying it, whether it's another's life or your own, is the ultimate rejection of the Creator's sovereignty.
Okay, I see. The author is meticulously mapping eternal moral laws onto these historical events.
Exactly. And following this tragedy, the text notes that Adam and Eve continued to live for centuries.
Right, lifespans were wild back then.
Yeah, Adam lives to be 930 years old. And they are granted a third son, Seth, to continue what the text explicitly labels the pious line.
And the birth of Seth really introduces the next massive phase of this history. Because this initial fracture in the first family, this personal split between the pure-hearted and the habitual, right? Between Seth and Cain.
Yes.
It's about to scale up to an unrecognizable degree.
Yeah.
Because as humanity begins to multiply rapidly, and people are living for almost a millennium, this domestic division expands into a literal global crisis.
The demographic shift described here is staggering.
I can imagine.
You have a massive population boom fueled by these lifespans reaching up to 900 plus years. And for a long period, there is an absolute segregation of lineages.
Segregation.
Yeah. You have Seth's offspring, who are labeled the sons of God, and they are dedicated to preserving the true faith.
Okay.
And then on the other side of the world, you have Cain's offspring, the sons of men, who are defined entirely by their wickedness.
So they live in total isolation from each other for generations.
They do. But then the mechanism of corruption kicks in. The text states that the good line, the descendants of Seth, begin intermarrying with the daughters of the bad line, the descendants of Cain. And through this proximity, through this intermarriage, the good line begins to adopt bad habits. They become corrupted, and they completely forget the true God.
So the author is exploring the concept of moral vulnerability here. Like the internal logic of this theological worldview, human nature post-Eden possesses a severe gravitational pull toward sin.
Yes.
Though I have to inject a thought here, because the narrative tension the author builds is really peculiar to me.
So?
Well, the text frames it as an absolute given that the wicked influence will effortlessly overpower the righteous influence.
Right.
And it makes me wonder, why is moral character portrayed as so incredibly fragile here? Like, why doesn't the text assume that Seth's righteous lineage would lift up the wicked lineage of Cain? Why does the good always lose to the bad in this scenario?
That is a brilliant observation. Think of it as spiritual entropy.
Spiritual entropy. Okay, unpack that.
So in physics, closed systems naturally move from order to disorder unless immense continuous energy is applied, right?
Right.
The author views goodness not as some aggressive, conquering force that just naturally overtakes a population. Instead, goodness is a highly vulnerable state requiring active preservation and quarantine.
Wow. Yeah.
Proximity to corruption accelerates the spiritual entropy because, fundamentally, falling down a mountain is infinitely easier than climbing one. The righteous are pulled down because sin requires less effort.
That makes so much sense in the context of the story. Spiritual entropy perfectly captures the vibe of this era.
It really does.
Because the disorder becomes so absolute that eventually, out of the entire global population, only one single man and his family remain faithful.
Right, the righteous Noah.
Yes, Noah. And beholding this total global corruption, God decides to cleanse the earth with water. But he doesn't just snap his fingers and flood the globe instantly.
No, he does not.
The text highlights a fascinating detail. God grants a 120-year grace period for humanity to repent.
A century and 2 decades of warning. The psychological implications of that timeline are staggering.
Right. You are listening. Just try to visualize this. Imagine your local city council posting a massive, inescapable eviction notice on every building in your town.
Okay.
And it states in bright red letters, in exactly 1 century, this entire valley will be flooded to wipe you out.
I mean, for the first few years, people might panic.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But after 50 years, after 100 years,
People will just go to work.
buy groceries. The residents would just go about their business. They would treat this apocalyptic warning as mere background noise. For 4 generations, Noah is building a giant boat, and society just completely ignores the impending doom.
It really speaks to the author's profound belief in human stubbornness and, honestly, the normalization of impending disaster.
Yeah, normalization is the perfect word.
The text states that humanity didn't just ignore the warning, they became progressively worse. So when the grace period finally expires, God commands Noah to finalize the ark. And the logistical meticulousness of this section is really quite something.
Logistical in what way?
Well, Noah builds a huge rectangular vessel. It's more like a floating house than a modern ship with a prow. And he begins loading the animals.
And the cargo manifest here is where the text diverges from the popular nursery rhyme version we all know.
Right, 2 by 2.
Yeah, Noah doesn't just bring 2 of everything. The author specifies that Noah brings 1 pair of the, quote, unclean animals, but he brings 7 pairs of the, quote, clean animals.
And clean here means the specific species that are deemed acceptable for religious sacrifice.
So wait, he brings 14 of the clean animals
Mm-hmm.
and only 2 of the unclean ones.
Yes, and this is a remarkable instance of logistical foresight woven directly into a cataclysmic narrative.
How so?
Because if Noah is tasked with preserving the true faith, he will need to offer sacrifices to God immediately upon disembarking into a ruined world.
Oh, I see.
If he only brought one single breeding pair of sheep, sacrificing one would instantly drive the entire species to extinction.
Wow. Yeah, you sacrifice the male and that's it. No more sheep forever.
Exactly. So bringing 7 pairs ensures the ecological survival of the species while simultaneously allowing for the immediate resumption of necessary religious rituals.
That is such a pragmatic detail to include in an otherwise mystical event. I love that.
Me too.
So Noah seals the ark and the deluge begins. And the imagery the author uses is intense. It's not just a heavy rainstorm.
No, it's cosmic destruction.
The text explicitly says, "All the fountains of the great deep were broken up, and the windows of heaven were opened. So water is exploding from subterranean aquifers while the sky literally collapses."
And the floodwaters prevail for 150 days.
Which is terrifying.
It is. But the author tracks the chronological progression of the receding waters with forensic detail. Like, in the 7th month, the ark rests on the mountains of Ararat. But it isn't until the 10th month that the mountaintops finally appear above the waterline.
It took that long just to see a peak.
Yeah.
And then we get the famous sequence of Noah releasing the birds to test the environment.
All right, the raven and the dove.
First, he sends a raven, which basically just flies back and forth, finding nowhere to land. Then he sends a dove 3 separate times.
Which is very methodical.
Very. The first time, it finds no dry place and returns. Noah waits 7 days and sends it again. This time, it brings back a fresh olive leaf.
Which is definitive proof of new vegetative growth.
Exactly. And then the third time, the dove doesn't return at all. Noah opens the roof, sees dry land, and disembarks.
And true to the logistical setup we highlighted earlier with the 7 pairs, the very first action Noah takes upon stepping onto the mud of the new world is erecting an altar.
He gets right to work.
He offers a sacrifice of thanksgiving from those clean animals, and God accepts it, blesses Noah's family, and establishes a covenant.
A rainbow.
Yes, a divine promise that there will never again be a worldwide flood to destroy all life. And the visual sign of this promise is the rainbow.
Okay, so this marks an incredible pivot point in the source material.
It really does.
Because you are reading this profound, ancient moral fable about human entropy and divine judgment, and then the author just abruptly shifts gears.
He hits the brakes on the narrative.
Hard. He aggressively abandons the theological narrative tone and plunges directly into scientific, linguistic, and historical arguments. He basically attempts to ground this watery cataclysm in empirical reality.
This transition is a masterclass in preemptive defense. Father Seraphim Slobodskoy, writing in the mid-20th century, is acutely aware that he is addressing a modern, scientifically literate audience.
He knows who is reading his book.
Exactly. He knows his readers possess a natural skepticism toward the physical mechanics of a literal worldwide flood. I mean, it's hard to wrap your head around.
Yeah, how does water cover Mount Everest?
Precisely. So, to counter this, he deploys a multi-pronged defense strategy, blending 19th and 20th century science with ancient linguistics to build this apologetic fortress.
Let's break these specific arguments down because the mental gymnastics here are utterly fascinating.
Let's do it.
He starts with a geographical and physical argument. He cites an English scientist named Arthur Hooke, who in turn relies on calculations from a Dr. John Murray.
Right.
And the core argument goes like this. If you were to somehow take a giant cosmic rolling pin to the Earth and flatten the entire globe—
Just completely smooth it out.
yeah, smoothing out all the mountain ranges and filling in all the deep ocean trenches until you had a perfect smooth sphere. If you did that, the existing water in our oceans is of such massive volume that it would cover this flattened planet to a uniform depth of 2 miles.
2 miles of water everywhere.
Everywhere.
What the author is doing here is addressing the skeptic's primary physical objection regarding capacity. The skeptic asks, where did all the water come from to cover the mountains?
And the author's reply is, look at the Pacific Ocean. The planet is already drowning.
Exactly. He's saying there is plenty of water. The flood wasn't a matter of adding new water from space. It was merely a temporary, catastrophic alteration of the Earth's topography.
Okay, so he paints a picture of a planet that is essentially a water balloon with a few rocky protrusions.
Right.
But then literally in the next breath, He introduces a linguistic argument that seems to completely walk back the absolute necessity of a global flood in the first place.
The linguistic pivot is fascinating to me.
It's a total left turn.
It is. The author argues that when ancient literature, whether that's biblical Hebrew or Byzantine texts, when they use terms translated as the earth or the universe, they are rarely talking about the literal spherical globe.
Oh, really?
Yeah, they're referring to the known human habitation, the civilized world.
Oh, I see.
He provides historical evidence, pointing out that the Byzantines frequently called the Mediterranean basin the universe, and they referred to their emperor as the ruler of the universe.
Meaning the flood might not have needed to cover the Andes or Mount Everest.
Exactly.
It might have just been a localized regional cataclysm that wiped out the specific geographic valleys where the human population was concentrated at the time.
Yes.
But I have to push back on the author's internal logic here.
Go for it.
He argues both that there is physically enough water to drown a flattened globe, and simultaneously argues that the flood might have just been a localized event in populated areas.
He does.
Isn't he totally hedging his bets?
Yeah.
Like, which defense does he actually want the reader to believe?
Oh, it is an undeniable rhetorical hedge. The author is essentially providing a buffet of apologetics.
A buffet. I like that.
He is saying, look, if you are a strict biblical literalist who demands a global event, here is the geological math showing it is physically possible.
The 2 miles of water argument.
Right. However, if you are a pragmatist bothered by the sheer mechanics of global geology, here is a linguistic loophole demonstrating it only had to be a local flood to accomplish God's specific goal of wiping out humanity.
Okay, so the text's internal logic doesn't require both arguments to be perfectly harmonious.
Not at all. It only requires the listener to accept that at least one of them provides enough plausible deniability to validate the ancient narrative.
A buffet of apologetics. You take the defense that suits your intellectual palate.
Exactly.
But the author doesn't stop at physical capacity and linguistics. He moves right into anthropology, leveraging the widespread cultural memory of flood myths across the globe.
Which is a very common yet powerful apologetic tool.
Yeah, the author compiles this a sweeping list of ancient civilizations that possess a great flood narrative. He points to the Chaldees, the Phoenicians, the Babylonians, the Persians, and the Greeks.
And he specifically highlights the Phrygians, which was an ancient kingdom in Anatolia. He claims they minted a coin depicting a boat with the letters N-O stamped on it.
N-O, directly linking it to the name Noah.
Yes.
The geographic spread of his examples is what makes the argument sticky, honestly.
It's hard to ignore.
He moves way beyond the Middle East, bringing in India, the Aztecs in the Americas, and even referencing an ancient Chinese myth where a man and his 7 family members are saved from a deluge in a vessel.
Which neatly mirrors the 8 people on Noah's Ark.
Exactly. I keep coming back to the analogy of a massive multi-millennial game of historical telephone.
Okay, yeah.
The author's underlying premise is that this watery catastrophe was so absolute, so universally traumatic, that the core memory of the event was burned into the scattered consciousness of humanity.
The core trauma survived.
Right. Even as populations isolated themselves, as cultural details morphed over time, as the names of the gods shifted and the shape of the boat changed, the trauma of the water survived the centuries.
The text frames these global myths not as competing, isolated fictions invented by ancient imaginations, but as corrupted, fragmented echoes of a single historical reality.
That's a powerful way to frame it.
It is. And finally, to seal this comprehensive defense, the author introduces a strictly geological argument.
This is where he brings in 19th century French scientists. He specifically mentions Mortelly and Cuvier.
Right, Cuvier was a pioneering paleontologist.
And the author talks about geological excavations revealing a very specific anomaly in the Earth's crust. They found a thick, distinct layer of clay and alluvial deposits.
And for you listening, an alluvial deposit is essentially the sediment, silt, and gravel left behind by rushing catastrophic waters.
Exactly. And this specific layer contains 0 organic animal remains, and it sharply divides the earlier Stone Age sedimentary layers from the later Neolithic, Bronze, and Iron Ages.
So Mortelly labeled this layer the hiatus, or the Great Break.
And Cuvier quite literally named it the deluge.
By stacking geography, linguistics, anthropology, and geology all on top of one another, the author attempts to create an overwhelming cumulative case.
He's throwing everything at the wall.
He is. He's sending a clear message to the modern reader. You do not have to rely solely on blind faith.
Because the rocks are speaking.
Yes. The very strata of the rocks, the inherited myths of the Aztecs, and the staggering depths of the ocean all testify to the physical reality of Noah's Ark.
It is an incredibly aggressive, comprehensive intellectual defense. And having established to his satisfaction that the physical Earth was violently reshaped by water, the text immediately pivots again.
What does he pivot to this time?
He explores how humanity itself was geographically and linguistically reshaped by Noah's descendants in the New World.
Yes. We enter the post-flood era, so Noah and his three sons, Shem, Ham, and Japheth, are essentially the only men left alive. And the text notes that Noah begins to work the newly dried earth. He plants a vineyard. He cultivates the grapes, makes wine, and consumes it.
And things go a bit sideways here.
They do. The author includes a small, almost sympathetic detail here. He notes that because Noah did not yet know the intoxicating strength of fermented wine in this new post-flood environment.
Like the atmosphere had changed or something.
Right, something like that. Because of that, he becomes heavily intoxicated and falls asleep naked inside his tent.
And this isolated moment of vulnerability leads to a domestic incident that generates massive geopolitical consequences that echo throughout the rest of the text.
Massive consequences.
Noah's son Ham enters the tent, sees his father's nakedness, acts with distinct disrespect, and goes outside to basically gossip about it to his brothers.
But Shem and Japheth react entirely differently.
They do. They take a garment, place it across their shoulders, and intentionally walk backward into the tent so they do not look upon their father's vulnerability, covering him with reverence.
And when Noah eventually wakes up and realizes what transpired, he issues a profound bifurcated prophecy. It functions simultaneously as a generational curse and a sweeping blessing.
Okay, let's break that down.
He curses Ham's lineage, specifically targeting Ham's son, Canaan. He prophesies that Canaan's offspring will become subservient slaves to the offspring of his brothers.
Okay.
Conversely, he blesses Shem, declaring that the true faith of God will be preserved through his specific bloodline.
And what about Japheth?
Finally, he blesses Japheth, prophesying that his descendants will spread out extensively across the earth and will eventually be welcomed into the spiritual tents of Shem, basically adopting the true faith from Shem's line.
So I have to stop the narrative here again because I have a major ethical query regarding the text's own established rules.
Okay, lay it on me.
It seems incredibly intense and frankly disproportionate that Canaan, the grandson, is the one cursed with generational slavery for a mistake his father, Ham, made in a tent.
It does seem harsh.
Right. Because we just spent significant time in chapter 8 establishing that God judged Cain strictly for his own individual heart and intent.
Right, God didn't curse Cain's great-grandson.
Exactly. God judged Cain for Cain. So how does the text's internal logic reconcile this inherited multi-generational punishment with the strict idea of individual moral responsibility?
It is profoundly jarring, isn't it? I mean, as a modern reader, our immediate instinct is to reject that inherited curse as deeply unfair.
Totally.
But if we put on the author's theological worldview goggles, we see a shift in how humanity is categorized post-flood.
A shift how?
Well, the author operates on a premise where families and emerging lineages are treated as collective moral entities.
Okay.
So Ham's disrespect is not viewed by the text as an isolated momentary lapse in judgment. It is diagnosed as a fundamental cancerous flaw in his spiritual disposition.
A lack of reverence.
Yes, a total lack of reverence for patriarchal authority. And the text assumes that this disposition will inevitably define the culture of his descendants.
So the quote-unquote curse on Canaan is framed less as a vindictive punishment and more as a prophetic observation.
Exactly. It's a prophetic observation of the inevitable tragic trajectory of a bloodline that fundamentally lacks reverence.
So Noah isn't just an angry grandfather throwing a hex. He is acting as a spiritual diagnostician.
That's a great way to put it.
He's observing a genetic defect, almost, in Ham's character that will play out destructively over the coming centuries.
Exactly the lens the author uses. And the text claims this prophecy was fulfilled with total geographic precision.
Geographically, how so?
Well, the Semites' Shem's line, which eventually includes the Hebrews, they stay in Asia and preserve the faith.
Okay.
The Japhethites spread into Europe and northern Asia. And the Hamites, specifically the Canaanites, settle in the regions of Africa and Palestine, eventually facing the subjugation Noah predicted.
But before that subjugation ever occurs, the descendants of Ham make a massive, concerted, and architectural effort to rebel against this prophecy.
Yes, they do.
Which brings us to the construction of the Tower of Babel.
Ah, Babel.
And this is one of the most fascinating reinterpretations in the text, because usually, when the Tower of Babel is taught in popular culture, it is framed simply as a generic fable about human arrogance.
Right, like people wanted to build a really tall building to show off their engineering skills, and God got annoyed by their hubris.
Exactly. But this author frames the construction as a highly specific, calculated act of geopolitical rebellion.
The motivation behind the bricks is explicit in the text.
Okay, what is it?
The descendants of Ham, acting as the leaders, convince the broader population to gather in a plain in the land of Shinar. They decide to build a massive city and a tower whose top reaches into the heavens.
And the text provides their exact reasoning, doesn't it?
It does. It says, in order to be glorified and not be in subjugation to the offspring of Shem and Japheth, as Noah had prophesied.
Wow. So they are actively trying to outmaneuver the divine curse.
They are.
Think about it like an ancient corporate monopoly. They are trying to centralize all geopolitical power, all human resources, and all communication in one single impenetrable hub, Babylon.
Yes. They want to become too big to fail, too unified and powerful to ever be subjugated by anyone else.
That corporate monopoly analogy is perfect.
Hmm.
They're trying to engineer their own salvation from the prophecy through architectural scale and social centralization,
And at this point, the text notes, all of humanity still shares one single language.
which makes them dangerous.
Yes, this linguistic unity makes their collaboration incredibly efficient and dangerous.
So God observes this unified, centralized power structure and determines that it will only exponentially accelerate their capacity for organized evil.
Right.
So he acts as the ultimate divine antitrust regulator.
I like that.
He doesn't strike the tower down with a lightning bolt or send an earthquake. He targets the very mechanism of their unity. He confuses their language.
And by shattering their ability to communicate, God instantly dissolves the monopoly. The structural breakdown is immediate.
Because they can't talk to each other.
Exactly. They can no longer understand the architects, the foremen, or the laborers.
Just total chaos.
The construction halts completely, and humanity is forced to abandon the massive city, which earns the name Babylon, literally meaning confusion.
Frustrated and divided, they scatter across the globe, fulfilling the geographic distribution Noah had prophesied.
And this catastrophic scattering is the catalyst for a monumental shift in human consciousness.
Why is that?
Because with humanity geographically isolated and unable to communicate across linguistic borders, the shared unified knowledge of a single creator begins to fracture.
Oh, wow.
This beautifully sets the stage for the dawn of idolatry and the absolute necessity of isolating one man to remember the truth.
So, the author provides a deeply psychological explanation for how humanity transitioned from a unified monotheism into a fractured polytheism.
He does. The text asserts that as people scattered into the wilderness to form separate nations, they simply began to forget the invisible, true God.
And the primary reason the author provides for this amnesia is that, quote, sins clouded their reason.
That phrase is doing an incredible amount of heavy lifting.
It really is. The text argues that humans began looking at the overwhelming natural world around them.
The blinding sun, the mysterious moon, the stars.
The destructive power of fire, the life-giving water, and the diverse animals. And instead of seeing these elements as creations pointing back to a creator, their clouded reason caused them to worship the elements themselves.
They began carving idols out of wood and stone. They became pagans.
And it is absolutely crucial to understand how entirely the text's internal logic rejects the modern anthropological consensus on the evolution of religion here.
Oh, completely rejects it.
Because modern anthropology generally posits an upward progression.
Right. Early humanity started with primitive animism, assigning spirits to trees and rocks, evolved into complex polytheism with pantheons of gods, and eventually, over millennia, refined their philosophy into monotheism.
The idea that we started primitive and thought our way up to complexity.
Precisely.
Yeah.
But this text posits the exact literal opposite. It argues a strict devolutionary model.
Devolutionary.
Yes. It claims that pure monotheism was the pristine original starting point for all of humanity, and that paganism is a tragic regression.
So idolatry isn't an early, noble attempt by primitive minds to understand God.
No, not at all. It is a collective, self-inflicted amnesia brought on by sin, actively degrading human intellect.
I mean, if you are following the author's logic, the implications are wild.
They really are.
The text implies that ancient, sophisticated polytheistic peoples, like the builders of Stonehenge, the architects of the early Egyptian pyramids, the creators of the Hindu pantheon, they weren't just culturally different or philosophically diverse.
Right.
In this worldview, they were a humanity suffering from a literal inherited brain fog regarding their own true history. Their reason was diseased.
Yes. The light of the original truth had been almost entirely extinguished globally.
Almost entirely.
Yeah.
But amidst this global wave of amnesia, the text focuses on one single man who somehow remembers. Yes. In Asia, living among the offspring of Shem, in the land of Chaldea, near the bustling pagan city of Babylon, there is a wealthy, righteous man named Abraham. He is 75 years old, and he had miraculously retained the true faith.
And because Abraham is essentially the very last glowing ember of this original faith on the entire planet, God has to intervene to protect him from the surrounding darkness.
Right.
God speaks to Abraham and commands him to leave his homeland, to abandon his pagan relatives, and travel to a distant land that God will reveal to him.
And the reason the text gives for this massive migration is explicitly an ideological quarantine.
The divine command is an act of preservation.
Right. Think of it like taking a delicate, incredibly rare, deeply endangered plant out of an overgrown invasive jungle.
Okay, yeah.
You can't just leave it there and hope it fights off the weeds. You have to physically uproot it, transport it across the world, and plant it in a dedicated, isolated greenhouse if you want it to survive and eventually produce seeds.
The greenhouse analogy perfectly captures the necessity of Abraham's journey.
It's all about protection.
Exactly. God isolates Abraham to protect his future offspring from assimilating into the false faiths of their neighbors. And the promise attached to this quarantine is immense.
What's the promise?
God promises to make Abraham into a great nation, to give him the promised land of Canaan, and crucially, God declares, "In thee shall all families of the earth be blessed."
And the text explicitly links that specific blessing to the ultimate promise of a future Savior who will emerge from Abraham's line to redeem the whole earth.
So Abraham, his elderly wife Sarah, and his nephew Lot pack up their massive encampments, their wealth, and their herds, and they migrate to Canaan.
But arriving in the geographical greenhouse doesn't magically erase the tension of living in a fallen world.
No, the real world is still very messy. In this new, fertile land, Abraham immediately has to navigate complex family dynamics and the brutalities of regional warfare.
Right.
Both Abraham and his nephew Lot become extremely wealthy in Canaan. So wealthy, in fact, that their sheer volume of sheep and cattle begins to cause severe ecological and social friction.
Too many animals,
Yeah.
not enough land.
Exactly. Their respective shepherds are constantly arguing and fighting over access to grazing land and water wells.
So Abraham, acting as the ultimate patriarch and peacemaker, approaches his nephew and basically says, "Look, we are family. Let's not let our herds cause violence between us."
Which is very noble.
Yeah. He says, "You look out over the land and pick whatever territory you want. If you go left, I'll go right. If you go right, I'll take the left."
And the text presents this as a profound test of values.
A test that Lot seemingly fails.
Well, Lot surveys the landscape and makes his choice based entirely on surface-level, material appeal.
Right.
He sees the lush, well-watered valley of the Jordan River and chooses to settle his camps near the notoriously wicked city of Sodom.
While Abraham, demonstrating a detachment from material greed, accepts what is left and settles by the Oak of Mamre in Hebron.
And Lot's choice, based on greed, turns out to be a terrible tactical decision.
Because of the warlords.
Yes. Shortly after he relocates, a massive coalition of local warlords, led by the king of Elam, launches a military campaign against the region.
They attack Sodom, utterly sack the city, kidnap the civilian population, and seize all the wealth.
And Lot and all of his possessions are taken captive.
When news of this kidnapping reaches Abraham at the Oak of Mamre, his reaction entirely shatters the image of a passive nomad.
He doesn't just sit there and pray.
No. He instantly shifts into the role of a tactical military commander. He arms 318 of his own trained servants, forms a quick alliance with some neighboring clans, and launches a daring pursuit.
It's very intense.
It is. He attacks the enemy coalition at night, completely defeats them, and rescues Lot, the captive citizens, and all the stolen property.
It reads like a high-stakes action movie sequence dropped right into the middle of a theological text.
It really does. But the real twist of this event doesn't happen on the battlefield, it happens on the journey home.
Yes, the encounter.
Abraham is returning in victory with the spoils of war, and he is suddenly intercepted by one of the most enigmatic, bizarre, and debated figures in this entire textual tradition.
A man named Melchizedek.
Melchizedek. And he steps onto the scene as the king of Salem, a city whose name the text notes means peace, and he is identified as a priest, of the Most High God.
Right. He approaches the victorious Abraham, offers him a specific gift of bread and wine, and issues a solemn blessing.
And in response, Abraham, the great chosen patriarch of the faith, gives this mysterious king a tithe, a tenth of all the spoils he recovered in the battle.
Now, I have to pause here.
Oh, please do, because this part is wild.
Because when I read this section, my brain genuinely broke for a second, trying to follow the author's logic.
I know exactly what you mean.
We literally just spent the last 30 minutes establishing that Abraham was chosen, isolated, and quarantined precisely because he was practically the only human being left on the entire planet who still remembered and preserved the true faith.
Right. The entire justification for his migration was that everyone else on Earth was a pagan.
Exactly. So who in the world is Melchizedek, and how is he already operating as a recognized, high-ranking priest of the true God right in the middle of Canaanite territory?
It is structurally confounding. Melchizedek violently breaks the narrative rule the author just spent chapters painstakingly establishing.
He really does. But the text itself openly acknowledges this mystery.
Oh, it does.
Yeah, noting that Melchizedek has no known background, no recorded ancestry, and no historical account of his death.
He just appears.
He simply materializes, pulls rank on Abraham, the supposed father of the faith, receives a tithe, and vanishes back into the mist of history.
Wow.
But the author doesn't attempt to explain his historical origin. Instead, he explains his profound theological function.
Right. The text uses Melchizedek as a kind of time-traveling metaphor to validate future events. The author explicitly states that Melchizedek is a prototype of Jesus Christ.
Yes. What the author is deploying here is a concept known as typological theology.
Typological theology. Break that down for us.
Imagine the author is treating ancient history like complex literary foreshadowing.
Okay.
Event A in the ancient past only exists to act as a symbolic preview or a type of event B in the distant future.
So Melchizedek is event A.
Exactly. The author argues that Melchizedek's dual role as both a king and a priest, his lack of a recorded beginning or end symbolizing eternity, and his highly specific offering of bread and wine. All of these were intentionally planted by the divine into the ancient narrative to prefigure and validate later Christian realities.
Specifically, the eternal priesthood of Christ and the central sacrament of Holy Communion.
Exactly.
The best analogy I could come up with for Melchizedek is that he operates like a high-level cameo in a massive cinematic universe.
Oh, like a post-credits scene dropping early?
Yes. He is a character who drops into the movie out of nowhere, completely upends the established lore of the world, clearly outranks the main protagonist, drops a massive Easter egg for a sequel that won't happen for 2,000 years, and then exits the plot without ever getting an origin story.
That captures his narrative function brilliantly. He is a theological anchor dropped from the Christian future into the patriarchal past, designed to prove that the entire narrative has always been heading toward a singular conclusion.
It is a staggering piece of narrative architecture. And this overarching theme, these sudden, profound, paradigm-shifting encounters with the divine interrupting the mundane world, it really culminates beautifully in the very final chapter of the source material we're covering today.
Yes, and this event takes place back under the shade of that exact same oak of Mamre.
Okay, set the scene for us.
We advance the timeline. Abraham is now 99 years old. Sarah, his wife, is 89.
Almost a century old.
Right. And despite the grand promise God made to them decades earlier about becoming a great nation, they still have no children.
No heirs.
And the text paints a remarkably quiet, mundane, domestic scene. It's the heat of the day, and Abraham is simply sitting in the shade of the oak tree at the entrance to his tent, escaping the sun.
But suddenly, 3 strangers appear. They were just standing there in the distance. And Abraham's reaction to seeing them is explosive.
He doesn't just casually wave hello from his chair.
No, not at all. The text details a display of intense, almost frantic ancient hospitality. The 99-year-old patriarch jumps up, runs to meet them, bows his face to the earth, and begs them to stay and rest.
He fetches water to wash their dusty feet.
He runs into the tent and orders his 89-year-old wife to quickly knead dough and bake fresh bread.
He runs out to the herd, meticulously picks out the absolute best, most tender, fatted calf, hands it to a servant to be cooked, and stands by to serve them as they eat under the tree.
The author goes out of his way to emphasize this eagerness to serve as the absolute pinnacle of ancient righteousness.
Yes, because Abraham doesn't know who these men are yet.
Exactly. But his default disposition, which stands in stark contrast to Cain's mechanical habit or the cruelty of the Sodomites we talked about earlier, his default is immediate, sacrificial, joyful generosity towards strangers.
The level of effort is just extreme.
It is. Comparing this to modern times, it would be like spotting 3 random hikers walking past the end of your driveway, running out to intercept them, rolling out a literal red carpet, hiring a string quartet on the spot, and cooking a 5-star Michelin-tasting menu for them while you stand by with a towel over your arm.
It is a wildly disproportionate reaction to strangers.
But this elaborate hospitality is merely the setup for the true climax of the encounter.
Right. As the strangers are eating the meal Abraham prepared, they ask a pointed question. Where is Sarah, thy wife?
And Abraham replies that she is inside the tent.
Then one of the strangers drops a biological bombshell.
It's a huge one.
He declares, I will certainly return to thee according to the time of life, and lo, Sarah, thy wife, shall have a son.
And Sarah is standing just inside the tent flap, out of sight, listening to this whole exchange.
And she exhibits what is perhaps the most relatable, profoundly human reaction in this entire ancient text.
She laughs to herself.
She does. She looks at her own body and thinks, after I'm waxed old, shall I have pleasure, my lord being old also.
I mean, she is 89 years old. Her husband is pushing a century.
It is the ultimate, unavoidable clash between biological realism and divine intervention.
Truly.
Sarah is a pragmatist looking at the empirical data of her own failing body and the immutable laws of nature.
If you're listening to this, just put yourself in Sarah's shoes for a moment.
Okay.
You are 89 years old. A dusty stranger shows up in your driveway, eats your calf, and calmly tells your 99-year-old husband that you are going to be pregnant next year.
You wouldn't just laugh, you would probably call for medical help.
Exactly. Her reaction is the only sane response.
But the stranger, who the text begins to reveal is actually God speaking, challenges her silent skepticism.
Because he knows she laughed in secret.
Right. He turns to Abraham and asks, wherefore did Sarah laugh? Is anything too hard for the Lord?
And Sarah is instantly terrified because she realizes she has been caught by a being who can read her innermost thoughts.
And in her fear, she lies. She says, I laughed not.
And the stranger shuts down her denial with this incredible, quiet, unshakable authority. He simply replies, nay, but thou didst laugh.
Nay, but thou didst laugh. The psychological tension in that tiny piece of dialogue is brilliant.
It really is. It isn't a furious, thunderous condemnation. It is a calm statement of absolute reality.
It feels like the text is asking you, the reader, to confront your own reliance on what is physically possible.
Which makes me wonder, is the author subtly critiquing Sarah's practical realism here?
That's a good question.
Like, is he comparing her skepticism negatively against Abraham's blind faith? Or is he just highlighting how genuinely impossible the promise actually was in order to emphasize the scale of the impending miracle?
I think within the context of the entire narrative arc we have traced today, it is functioning as both.
Okay.
It is a profound acknowledgement of human limitation. Sarah's laughter represents the ultimate boundary of human imagination. We can only believe what we can conceive based on our prior experience with the laws of physics and biology.
Which makes sense.
But the divine promise intentionally shatters that boundary. Abraham realizes at that exact moment, sitting under the oak tree, that he is speaking with the Creator himself, because only the Creator has the authority to promise life in a space where biological reality dictates it is absolutely impossible.
And that quiet realization, that moment of impossibility under the oak of Mamre, is where our specific source material for this deep dive concludes.
Wow.
What an incredibly massive, complex arc we have covered today.
It truly is. We have traversed an immense conceptual and historical landscape.
Let's do a quick recap of the journey we just took, just to tie it all together.
Sounds good.
So we started with the first fracture, a rejected sacrifice and a brother's murder, rooted deeply in the danger of mechanical habit versus a pure heart.
Then we watched humanity multiply and succumb to spiritual entropy, corrupting itself to the point of a global flood.
We examined how the author defended that cataclysm with a buffet of 19th century geology, typography, and cross-cultural flood myths.
We saw a towering city built out of political fear and a desire for monopoly, shattered by the confusion of languages.
We traced the birth of ancient polytheism, not as an evolution, but as a tragic, self-inflicted amnesia of the true God.
And finally, we ended with an elderly, quarantined couple hosting the divine under an oak tree, receiving a promise that defied the very laws of biology.
The core theme we must reinforce for everyone listening is how meticulously Father Seraphim Slobodskoy's text constructs its overarching worldview.
Yes, In this theological framework, human history is never a sequence of random, disconnected events.
It is a continuous, unbroken chain of moral choices, severe environmental consequences, and the desperate striving of preserved lineages to keep a true faith alive across millennia of entropy.
It is a universe where internal intention matters infinitely more than material offerings,
Where a single domestic dispute in a tent can rewrite the geopolitics of continents.
and where the divine is constantly intimately interacting with the mundane details of human life.
And grappling with this text leaves us with a profound question about the nature of the narratives we construct for ourselves today.
It really does.
Which brings me to a final thought I want to leave you, the listener, with today. Something to mull over on your own that builds on what we've discussed, but brings it directly into your reality.
I love this part.
We spent a lot of time unpacking the text's premise regarding the builders of Babel and the early pagans. The idea that they suffered from clouded reason.
The amnesia.
Right. The text claims they literally forgot the truth of their own history. And in that vacuum of memory, they invented entirely new myths, new gods, and new realities to explain their existence.
The fragility of memory is a terrifying concept when applied not just to an individual, but to a whole civilization.
Exactly. So my question to you is this. If this ancient text views the dominant, culturally sophisticated cultures of its time as victims of a massive collective amnesia, how much of our own modern understanding of history is shaped by what we, as a civilization, have collectively chosen to remember?
That's a heavy thought.
Or perhaps, more chillingly, what have we unknowingly chosen to forget?
Wow.
Think about that narrative X-ray machine, that mass spectrometer we talked about at the very beginning of this deep dive. We like to think our modern tools give us a perfect, objective picture of the past.
But maybe the muddy waters are deeper than we realize.
And the historical stories we tell ourselves today are just the ones that happen to survive the flood of time. Take a moment today to explore how your own cultural narratives were formed. You might be surprised at what you find buried in the foundations.